"My wife stole this symphony," Duke Adrian announced. Silence fell across the royal concert hall. Elowen stood beneath the stage lights while Sir Lucien placed two identical scores upon the conductor's desk. His copy carried a date from 3 years earlier. Hers appeared to have been written only last month. Adrian removed her name from the evening program. "You used my position to claim another man's work." Elowen looked at the husband who had heard her compose every theme inside their private music room. "You recognized these melodies before Sir Lucien ever entered our house." "I recognize what the evidence proves." "No, you recognize the version that protects your reputation." She placed a sealed page upon the conductor's stand. "Let the orchestra play the ending no one has heard." Sir Lucien went pale. Elowen faced the audience. "If they already possess it, you will know who stole from whom." 7 years earlier, Adrian March had fallen in love with Elowen because she refused to let music collapse when everyone else stopped playing. They met during a private recital at Ravenscroft House. A young pianist lost his place halfway through a difficult sonata and froze before an audience of noble patrons. Elowen, seated beside him, continued the accompaniment without looking at the score. She altered the harmony, guided him back to the correct passage, and completed the performance as though nothing had gone wrong. Afterwards, Adrian found her alone near the music room. "You rescued him." "I listened to where he was, not where the page insisted he should be." "You knew the entire piece." "Enough of it." He asked her to play something of her own. Elowen refused at first. She had composed since childhood, but women of her rank were expected to perform charming songs, not claim authorship of serious work. Adrian persisted. Eventually, she played a short movement built around a winter bell. He remained silent until the final note faded. That was not written for a drawing room. No. Then, where should it be played? Somewhere. No one asks whether a woman was permitted to write it. Their courtship began in that room. After they married, Elowen continued composing at night. Adrian became the first person to hear every new section. He named the opening theme of her unfinished symphony, the Ravenscroft Winter. The slow cello passage followed the rhythm of his footsteps when he returned from Parliament. 4 cracked bells in the estate chapel inspired the central motif. Adrian once kept her earliest sketches inside his own desk. "You will finish it," he told her, "and when I do, we shall find an orchestra brave enough to play it." Elowen believed him. Then Adrian became patron of the Royal Music Society. Suddenly, every public decision was measured by critics, composers, and men who could decide whether he deserved the Society's chairmanship. Sir Lucien Voss became his most valued advisor. Lucien was celebrated across Europe. His portraits hung in theatres. His name alone could fill a concert hall. He also believed women were useful mainly as admirers. "A lady may inspire music," he said at one Ravenscroft dinner. "Composition requires a discipline rarely found in the female temperament." Elowen looked directly at him. "Perhaps men appear more disciplined because women are expected to surrender their work before anyone can compare it." Adrian changed the subject. Later, in private, Elowen asked why he had not challenged Lucien. "There were important patrons at the table. There are always important patrons when someone insults me. I know you are talented. You know it when no one can hear you." Adrian told her not to mistake diplomacy for shame, but slowly he stopped calling her a composer. At public gatherings, she became an accomplished pianist. Her symphony became a family piece. When she asked to submit it to the Royal Music Society, Adrian hesitated. "If they accept it, people will say I forced the decision." And if I submit without your name, they will still know you are my wife. So your position is protected only if I remain unheard. That is not what I said. It is what your caution requires. The theft began when Augusta March invited Lucien to inspect the Ravenscroft music collection. Elowen was visiting an ill friend in Bath. Lucien spent 2 hours alone inside her private music room. He saw the unfinished score. 3 complete movements lay inside the locked cabinet. The final movement existed only as scattered sketches because Elowen had not yet resolved its ending. Lucien copied everything he could reach. 6 months later, he announced a new symphony titled The Crown of Winter. The first rehearsal was closed to the public, but Adrian received 2 invitations. He brought Elowen because the society expected his wife to attend. The opening note was hers. Elowen knew it before the second instrument joined. The violins entered with the Ravenscroft bell motif. The cello answered with the rhythm she had written from Adrian's footsteps. Even the flaw in the second movement remained, a difficult violin passage Elowen had planned to revise. She rose from her seat. "That is my music." The orchestra stopped. Sir Lucien turned slowly from the conductor's platform. "I beg your pardon. You took that score from my music room." Murmurs spread through the hall. Adrian caught her arm. "Elowen, not here. Where would be more appropriate? The room where he is conducting my work under his name?" Lucien smiled with careful pity. "Her Grace may recognize certain similarities. Influence is common among amateur composers. The 3 dots beneath the rests are mine. A notation mark cannot establish authorship. You do not even understand what it means." Lucien's smile faded. Elowen faced the orchestra. "The mark means the player must preserve the emotional tension through the silence. Sir Lucien has instructed you to reduce the volume." Beatrice Hall, the principal violinist, looked down at her part. Lucien closed the score. "This rehearsal is concluded." By evening, the accusation had been reversed. Ambrose Bellamy, keeper of the Ravenscroft music room, claimed he had discovered a copied score inside Elowen's cabinet. The date written on her version was recent. Lucien's score bore a date 3 years earlier. An invoice suggested Elowen had paid a copyist to obtain Lucien's music. A letter in her desk asked how an author's name might be removed from a printed program. Adrian summoned a hearing at the Royal Concert Hall. He could have examined the documents privately. Instead, he wanted the society to see that he would not protect his wife. Lucien placed both scores before him. "The resemblance is unfortunate," he said, "but the dates are clear." Elowen examined the paper. The pages had been stained with tea to create false age. The date used ink darker than the musical notation. The binding carried pressure marks from Lucien's printer. She pointed out each inconsistency. Adrian listened, but fear had already shaped his judgment. "You have raised doubt," he said. "You have not proved that the composition is yours. You heard me write it. I heard fragments over several years. You named the opening theme. That does not prove the complete score belonged to you first." Elowen stared at him. "You require certainty before believing your wife. Sir Lucien required only an accusation before you condemned her." Adrian removed her name from the evening program. He barred her from the society's rehearsal rooms and demanded she issue a formal apology. Elowen refused. "You are protecting the chairmanship Lucien promised you. I am protecting the integrity of the society." "No, you are protecting the version of events in which your ambition remains respectable." She returned to Ravenscroft House, but moved her work into the small southern music room. She did not leave the estate. She would not allow Augusta to present her departure as an admission of guilt. Beatrice Hall visited 3 days later. She carried a violin part beneath her cloak. This came from Lucien's revised score. Elowen examined the page. The three-dot mark appeared beneath 2 rests. A passage in the final movement contained the same impossible fingering error from Elowen's stolen draft. He copied the mistake before I corrected it, Elowen said. Beatrice nodded. There is more. He has added a new ending. Elowen looked up. That is impossible. I thought so too. The ending contained 7 ascending violin notes. Elowen had written those notes the previous afternoon. They did not belong to the Ravenscroft winter. They belonged to a trap. She had prepared 3 false endings and sealed each one separately. Adrian received a version with a sustained horn line. Augusta received a descending cello phrase. The version locked inside Bellamy's cabinet contained 7 rising violin notes. No orchestra had seen any of them. Yet Lucien's musicians now possessed Bellamy's version. Elowen crossed to the desk and removed the 3 sealed records witnessed by her solicitor. The thief is still entering my room. Beatrice looked towards the door. Bellamy? Or someone using him? That evening, Elowen confronted the music keeper. Bellamy denied everything. Then she noticed black wax beneath his fingernail, the same wax used to seal the cabinet containing the false ending. He ran. Servants caught him near the western staircase. Inside his coat were a copied cabinet key and 50 guineas bearing Lucien's banking mark. Adrian arrived as the money was placed on the table. Bellamy looked from the Duke to Elowen. His courage collapsed. Sir Lucien paid me, he said. He ordered me to take the score. Adrian went pale. Which score? All of them. Before he could question the man further, bells sounded from the Royal Concert Hall. The public performance had been moved forward. Lucien intended to conduct the stolen symphony that very night, before Bellamy's confession could reach the society. Elowen gathered the sealed endings. Stop the performance, Adrian said. No. He stared at her. You cannot allow him to play your work. I need him to play the ending. By the time they reached the theatre, the audience had filled every seat. Lucien stood upon the conductor's platform. Elowen entered in a crimson gown with Beatrice, Bellamy, and the sealed evidence behind her. Lucien raised his baton. The orchestra began the final movement. The violins reached the last page. Then, before the entire court, they played 7 rising notes that had existed only inside Elowen's locked cabinet. Lucien's baton stopped in mid-air. Elowen stepped onto the stage and held up the unopened record bearing Bellamy's name. This ending was written after Sir Lucien claimed his symphony was complete. She looked towards Adrian, then towards the audience. It was never music. Her gaze settled on Lucien. It was bait. The final note faded beneath the painted ceiling. No one applauded. Sir Lucien remained upon the conductor's platform with his baton raised, as though refusing to lower it might prevent the audience from understanding what they had heard. Elowen crossed the stage. Beatrice followed with the revised violin part. Bellamy stood between 2 theatre guards, his copied key and Lucien's payment displayed upon a silver tray. Adrian remained below the platform. For once, he did not attempt to control the room before the evidence had been heard. Lucien recovered first. A rising scale proves nothing. 7 notes may occur in 1,000 compositions. Not these 7, Elowen replied. She placed the sealed record on the conductor's stand. The outer page bore the date, her solicitor's signature, and Bellamy's name. This envelope records the version locked inside Mr. Bellamy's cabinet. It was written 5 days after you declared your score complete." Lucien looked towards Bellamy. The music keeper's face collapsed. Elowen continued. "2 other false endings were prepared. One was given to my husband, the other to the Dowager Duchess. Neither appears in the orchestral parts." She held up Beatrice's page. "Only the version accessible through Bellamy's cabinet was copied into tonight's performance." Lucien gave a dismissive laugh. "Then Her Grace arranged for Bellamy to bring it to me." Bellamy spoke before fear could silence him again. "She did not." Lucien turned sharply. Bellamy swallowed. "You paid me to enter the Southern Music Room. You said every score written under the Ravenscroft roof belonged to His Grace's household." A murmur travelled through the audience. Lucien's voice hardened. "And you accepted the money?" "Yes." "Then you are hardly a reliable witness." "No," Elowen said. "He is an involved witness. That is why his testimony must be tested against records." Jonah Reed stepped from the wings carrying a narrow account book. Lucien's expression changed. The copyist placed the book beside the sealed endings. "I recorded every manuscript delivered to Sir Lucien's rooms," Jonah said. "I was instructed to change titles, transpose themes, and remove original names." Lucien pointed towards him. "You were paid to copy music. I was paid to disguise where it came from." Jonah opened the account book. One entry recorded Bellamy's delivery of the Ravenscroft score. Another listed the cost of tea, smoke, and heat used to age paper. A third described payment for a forged date 3 years earlier. The audience grew restless. Several composers seated near the front began demanding to see the pages. Lucien struck the stand with his baton. "This is an attack organized by a woman desperate for recognition." Elowen looked at him. "You have spent years relying upon that accusation. A woman asks for credit, so she must be vain. A copyist admits wrongdoing, so he must be bitter. A violinist notices inconsistency, so she must be emotional." Beatrice placed the violin part before the conductor. "You misunderstood the 3-dot mark," she said. "You instructed us to reduce the sound. Her Grace intended the silence to hold tension." Lucien's mouth tightened. "That is interpretation." "It is authorship," Elowen replied. "You copied the mark without understanding why it existed." She turned towards the orchestra. "Begin at the bell passage in the 2nd movement." The conductor refused to move. Beatrice lifted her violin. The other players looked towards one another. Then the cellist joined her. 4 notes sounded through the hall, uneven, distant, the pattern of the cracked bells at Ravenscroft Chapel. Elowen faced Lucien. "You wrote in your program that the motif represents 4 cathedral bells heard in Vienna." It was an artistic description. "You had never visited Ravenscroft before Augusta gave you access to my music room." She produced an old household repair report. It described the 4 damaged chapel bells and the precise sequence in which they rang after a storm bent one of the mechanisms. The pattern matched the symphony exactly. Adrian closed his eyes. He remembered standing beneath those bells with Elowen years earlier. She had counted the uneven intervals aloud while he laughed at her determination to turn a broken mechanism into music. He had known where the motif came from, yet when Lucien claimed it, Adrian had allowed a forged date to outweigh his own memory. Lucien saw the realization on his face. "You cannot permit this spectacle to continue," he told him. "Your position in the society depends upon preserving its authority." Adrian looked at the man he had trusted more readily than his wife, then at Elowen, who had proved her authorship without asking him to rescue her. My position is no longer relevant. Lucien lowered his voice. If you support her now, everyone will say you acted to favor your wife. Adrian stepped onto the stage. They should say something worse. The hall quietened. They should say I heard my wife compose this music and still accepted a forged date because the truth threatened the position I wanted. Augusta rose from the front box. Adrian, do not make a confession in anger. I am not angry. He looked towards Elowen. I am ashamed. He turned back to the audience. I allowed Sir Lucien into my wife's private music room. I permitted the hearing that removed her name from the program. I called doubt an investigation when I had already chosen the conclusion most convenient to my ambition. Lucien backed away from the stand. Adrian removed the society's candidate ribbon from his coat. I withdraw from consideration for the chairmanship. A member of the council stood. Your Grace, that decision may be reviewed after. No. Adrian placed the ribbon beside Lucien's score. A man who condemned the composer he had personally heard at work should not govern an institution responsible for recognizing authorship. Elowen watched him surrender the position Lucien had used to control him. It did not erase the accusation, but he had finally paid a price without treating her forgiveness as part of the bargain. Lucien attempted to leave through the musicians' corridor. The guards stopped him. Jonah's account book contained the names of 12 other writers whose manuscripts had been delivered to Lucien. Some sat in the audience. A woman in the second balcony stood and demanded that a chamber piece published under Lucien's name be examined. A young composer produced letters proving he had submitted an overture to the society months before Lucien performed a nearly identical work. The scandal widened before the evening ended. Bellamy confessed to copying keys and moving manuscripts from Ravenscroft House. He also admitted placing the false score in Elowen's cabinet. Augusta had given Lucien permission to inspect the collection, but Bellamy had continued the theft after the visit in exchange for money. When Augusta asked that her role remain private, Elowen refused. You treated access to my work as a household courtesy, she said. That belief made theft respectable enough to enter through the front door. Augusta resigned from the Society's Ladies' Committee. Bellamy and Jonah both submitted themselves to investigation. Jonah's cooperation helped expose the wider scheme, but Elowen did not describe him as blameless. His fear explained his silence. It did not erase it. Lucien was charged with fraud, forgery, bribery, and theft of manuscripts. The performance did not end with his stolen finale. Elowen carried one final score to Beatrice. The true ending. No one else had seen it. Beatrice placed the pages upon the stands while the musicians adjusted their instruments. Elowen did not conduct. She stood beside the stage and listened as the first theme returned. The winter bells sounded again, no longer broken fragments but part of a fuller harmony. The difficult violin passage resolved into a clear line. The cello rhythm Adrian once inspired changed from a repeated step into a melody that moved independently. The music did not return to where it had begun. It had survived being stolen and became something larger. When the final chord ended, the audience rose. Adrian remained seated. This was not his triumph to share. Elowen's name was restored to the program before the hall emptied. The printed title read, The Ravenscroft Winter, composed by Elowen March, Duchess of Ravenscroft. In the months that followed, Elowen refused the directorship of the Royal Music Society. Instead, she required the society to establish a public manuscript register. Every submitted score received a dated seal. Every copyist was named. Alterations were preserved rather than erased. No work could be performed without a recorded chain of authorship. Anonymous submissions were allowed during judging, but accepted works had to be published under the true composer's name. Elowen released the Ravenscroft Winter without Adrian's title, appearing as patron. It succeeded because the music belonged on the stage, not because a duke had permitted it. She continued living in the southern rooms. Adrian wrote no letters asking her to return. He sent copies of every statement he gave to investigators and every document concerning Lucien's access to Ravenscroft. He did not ask her to review them. He simply ensured she possessed the truth he had once withheld. Several months later, Elowen invited a small ensemble to rehearse a new work. Adrian requested permission to attend. He entered without the society ribbon, without advisors, and without a seat reserved at the center. Elowen sat at the piano. A fresh score rested before her. Adrian stopped beside the empty chair near the music stand. "May I turn the pages?" She looked at him. "You once believed holding the score gave you authority over it. And now I understand it gives me the duty not to interrupt." Elowen considered him for a moment. Then she indicated the chair. "You will turn only when I signal." "Yes." She began to play. Adrian followed the music silently. At the end of the second page, Elowen lifted one finger. He turned it carefully. No court watched. No critic waited to praise him for supporting his wife. He sat beside her because she had allowed him to listen. Their marriage was not healed by one confession or one completed symphony. But, for the first time in years, Adrian heard Elowen's music without deciding whether society would permit it to exist. And Elowen continued playing under her own name.